been brought up in the 60s, a very famous surgeon, Christian Barnard, based in South Africa, was undertaking heart transplants. And that was a story that piqued my interest, you know, even before I was 10 years of age. And the joke is, at age 5, I wanted to be an actress, and my mother said, no, you're not going to drama school. You're going to do something that's got a chance of actually giving you a career. And so I decided, you know, that actually Barnard had combined two things. He'd become world famous, and he'd also, it sounds like the terrible vanity of a young child, but anyway, and he'd also done something for the first time. So I read his biography, One Life, and was quite inspired by it. And I think, looking back, those of you from South Africa probably know rather more about him than me, but he was a slightly flawed character who was massively ambitious, not just for himself, but also for his daughter. So there's a story about how he pushed his own daughter to be incredibly competitive. But having said that, I was the first doctor in my family. I knew very little about medicine, but I thought this was a real calling, a very interesting career. So I sort of went through my teens with the ambition of going to medical school, was lucky enough to get in. And then as an undergraduate, discovered oncology. So at University College, where I did my clinical training, my first medical firm was oncology. And I was really inspired by the people I work with, both the trainees and the senior doctors, and also the subject matter. And in fact, my first love was pediatric oncology, but more than ironically, my cousins had a child with neuroblastoma. And when I saw the impact of the first grandchild, actually the first child in the next generation below me, having a terminal diagnosis in her, you know, at the age of 3, it was actually quite, it had such a huge impact on the family that I decided that I would either need to be married to the job, or I would have to think about a different angle. But I did decide that oncology was the specialty I wanted to pursue, and fairly doggedly pursued that. So I did membership and then trained as an oncologist. My special interests over my career refined as we became more and more site specialized and moved into breast and gynecological cancers in particular. And then in my mid-40s developed breast cancer. So the experience of becoming a patient, I'd always seen myself as quite focused on patients and quite patient-centric, but actually until you've stood in their shoes, I discovered you don't quite know what it means. And I think the process of going through intensive chemotherapy with bone marrow support and the experience of alopecia, you know, all of those things made me realize that you don't know what your patients are experiencing until you actually experience it yourself. And it made me reflect on what I wanted to do. I had become increasingly interested in management. And so that's really where I started to think about an alternative to a career in medicine. So, and I'd started to think that actually you could make a bigger impact for patients by actually running a hospital rather than running your own clinical practice. And I became lead clinician for the Cancer Network in Surrey and Sussex, which was actually quite a challenging but also very rewarding role, bringing together the services across 5 different sites to really think about how we took a more site specialized approach to different tumor types. It coincided with the National Cancer Plan in the UK. And so over the period of 3 years, we moved to 12 different tumor groups where we had multidisciplinary teams across the whole patch, and we specialized which services would happen on which sites. So for example, for breast cancer, most sites continued to operate on patients. But for esophageal cancers and rarer cancers, we started to focus the surgery on 1 or 2 sites, in most cases on 1 site. And navigating all of that with the clinicians, with management, within the budgets, etc., was actually a very good set of skills for me. And I think sort of would have prepared me for a management role, but I think also has been helpful in my consulting career. Just being able to manage complex different stakeholders, to really sort of try to bring people together to build consensus and agree a way forward. And after that, I thought about becoming a chief executive. So I was advised the next step on the pathway should be becoming a medical director. So I became medical director of my hospital. Timing for me meant that my then chief executive moved on after only 18 months. So it was a little bit too soon for me to become the next medical director. And when I didn't, and when the next chief executive, and when the new chief executive arrived, he was a very different personality from his predecessor, very different from me. And I recognized that we were not going to be a great team, to be honest. It was going to be more difficult for us to work together. So I started to look at other options, and that was the point at which I went to the private sector. So I finished my chemotherapy and my radiotherapy. I had a phone call from a headhunter, literally my first full-time day back at work after the radiotherapy, and went for that job. It was Group Medical Director of Care UK. Well, it was actually a smaller company that was acquired 3 days before I started. So I also had the experience of what it's like to be part of an M&A deal, which was quite a baptism of fire. And in the next 2 years, I learned a huge number of skills, but I had governance responsibility across 5 different divisions of the business, from domiciliary care, care homes, elective surgery and primary care, etc. And it was through that I started to work more with consultants. And it was at the end of that 2-year period when I was thinking about going back into the NHS as a medical director of a teaching hospital, again with a view to becoming a chief exec, that somebody said, have you thought about consulting? And then I met the head of health and the head of public sector at KPMG in the UK, and the rest is history. So I think for me, sometimes the defining moment are the small things, actually. I had a very nice experience just before Christmas. You know, a new organization, had been in the previous one for 11 and a half years. You know, so was feeling comfortable, but was also feeling I still got to kind of prove myself. You know, people don't really know who I am. And we had an end of year, and several of the junior people posted in the chat, and it was a very positive meeting. People were asking, you know, were generally giving positive feedback. But the bit that I valued most, it felt like my best Christmas present, was thank you, Hilary, for always having a lens on diversity and always calling out, you know, when things are good or bad and being aware of it. You're a great champion. And I have to say that was one of the nicest things that had happened to me. I thought it was much, much more important than a big win or than, you know, whatever statistics I was being measured by. So that was really important. And I think watching leaders in the business that you want to learn from, working out who you want to be like, and also who you don't want to be like. So, you know, are there behaviors that you really don't want to adopt? And I remember being taught that as a medical student very early on. You know, you may decide you don't want to be the kind of doctor that I am, or you may, you know, and I remember thinking what a wise bit of counsel that was. And I think the other thing is the beauty of consulting, the beauty of consulting is all about teams. And so actually building high-performing teams, knowing how to give that glue, knowing the part that everybody plays in that team, you know, the different strengths that different people bring and their vulnerabilities, so that you can all be mutually supportive. And I think that's one of the reasons I love consulting, is I have the joy of working with younger people, you know, people early in their careers, people late in their careers, a whole mixture of people. And I think that's really, really rewarding, actually. And so we're all very lucky, I think, in this industry that we have that opportunity to work with a huge range of people and learn from a huge range of people, but also nurture a lot of people.